Welcome to the Hermit's Land podcast. I want to first start off by saying big thank you to all the wonderful people who are supporting the Patreon for this podcast. They are getting some awesome bonus stuff like special recordings, sneak peeks of artwork and other projects that I'm working on, and they are helping grow this podcast. They are helping move towards the goal of providing transcriptions so that deaf people can take part in these conversations. And they are also helping support the work that I do, running down guests, getting people on the show, coordinating people in different time zones and on other sides of the planets. And finally, they're helping improve the production value of this podcast by allowing me to start considering acquiring better equipment and get away from some of the janky duct tape together process I've been doing for a long time. If you dig the podcast, jump over to patreon.com/thehermitslamp and pitch in. Every dollar helps. Welcome to another installment of the Hermit's Land podcast. I am here today with Courtney Alexander, who I met in Portland last year when I was at the Northwest Tarot Symposium, and I got to see some of her stunning artwork in person for her deck that she's been working on, which is called the Dust to Onyx deck. It's some amazing stuff, and getting to hang out with Courtney for a bit, I thought she was a fascinating person, and so I've been gunning to get her on the podcast ever since. And she's been busy surviving hurricanes and finishing up her project for release, so we're catching up now. But for people who might not know who you are, Courtney, who are you? What's going on?
Hi, everyone. I am Courtney Alexander, and I'm a recent graduate of University of South Florida. So I graduated with my degree in studio art. And so before becoming this deck creator and entrepreneur that I am now, I was just a struggling college art student and just trying to adjust right after graduation, and then bam, like life happened and here I am.
Amazing.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
That's funny. How was art school for you? I went to art school up here, and I kind of hated it, and it kind of ruined making art for me. So I'm always curious how people's art school experiences were.
I personally have like nothing but positive things to say in my experience, because when I began, like I wanted to go to school for advertising because I've been a graphic designer and working in marketing throughout my life. And so that was what I was gunning for career-wise. Like I wanted to be a creative director. So like I was like, do I want to do the advertising program, or, will an art program help me expand my creativity and have more to offer my clients? That was like my purpose for going to art school, honestly. And through my journey through the program, I began to like go through this kind of self-actualization, and like my identity began to transform, and I really start shedding so many layers of myself through my artwork. And by the end of it, like I realized like, wow, like I'm an artist and I have something to say, and I love being in this world. So it definitely ended up becoming something that I didn't expect at all. But as far as just like on a day-to-day, like the program that I was at University of South Florida is like a really great program, especially for those interested in contemporary art. So I had the opportunity to go to a lot of artist talks, and I had some good professors who challenged me and really pushed me to experiment and to see my art in a different light. And so, I think for better or worse that, art school can be a valuable experience, because I've heard people, like you said, that haven't had like the most positive experience in the moment, but it was still very influential for them as an artist, you know. So either way, you kind of get pushed into whatever.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, the art school that I ended up at was very postmodern theory focused at the time that I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if there had been more space for aesthetic stuff, you know, just making things because they were cool and beautiful, as well as the idea of, you know, challenging concepts and all that stuff, I think that would have, I think that I needed a blend of that, you know, and that just wasn't going on there when I was there. So
yeah.
So when you started to shed these things as you were going through making your artwork and going through this program, was there a point at which you ever started to like engage that as a process of transformation for yourself? Or was the artwork kind of leading it and changing you as it went, or maybe some other kind of way?
I think that it was a little bit of both. I definitely began to use art as a form of empowerment for myself. And like, I began modeling for art classes because I've grown up, you know, all my life as a fat person, like, you know, 5'8", 330 pounds. So like the way that I navigate the world and people's response to me became something for me to explore. That was like my starting point where I really started to try and understand what concepts I wanted to convey. And so I started doing like mixed media installations and paintings and stuff around that subject. And then also, like I said, I started modeling for art classes. And so that whole process of being so vulnerable, like I'm literally like naked on this platform,
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, and you know how it is in art class, people are around you in a big circle. There are no good angles. This is not Snapchat or Instagram.
Yeah.
You see everything.
You don't get to like soft light it and make things look better.
No, not at all. And so like, and it's funny, usually people's response was like, man, you have so much confidence, but it had nothing to do with confidence at the time. Like, I just knew that I wanted to challenge myself. Like, I still was going through the self-loathing. I still was very insecure. I just knew that, like, for myself, putting myself in this new space and having this new experience would be beneficial for me, because I knew how I felt when I saw that model, and I thought she was like so beautiful, and it was just like, you know, this experience of drawing her and everything. I wanted people to have that experience with me. And so when I began modeling, like looking at myself and seeing people's depictions of me helped me embrace the parts of myself that I was the most judgmental of, because to me, I was looking at the artwork and I was like, man, this is actually really beautiful. Like, my body's beautiful. Like, you know, and it's not because my body is respectable in size. It's not because I have the perfect hourglass. It's literally like, I kind of like the way that roll falls over the side, over the side of this platform, you know, or with my artwork, just finally kind of processing the different experiences that I was having. Like, you know, for my first show that I ever did, it was called Overload. And so I had this big 8-foot sculpture that you can walk through. And it was inspired by Marina Abramovic's, one of her pieces she did with her partner, where they stood in the entryway of a museum nude and people had to like squeeze past them. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't do that on campus, obviously. So I just created a sculpture to kind of mimic that experience and bring people into sensual contact with fatness as a, you know, conceptually, and doing videos where like I played with lard and explored the violence of diet culture and how the ideas projected through diet culture were very detrimental psychologically to me. And I'm pretty sure a lot of other people of size who've struggled with it. Like, when you're being told all your life that you're going to die, that your body is going to kill you, that doesn't necessarily, like, it's so counterproductive to this idea that you should feel empowered enough to eat healthier and work out and be happy with yourself. So like, I was just addressing all of those things, and it was very, very healing. And then as I went through the program, I began studying art history more and learning about like West African art. And so I started learning more about my identity as a Black woman. And as a Black American, we've been stripped of so much identity wise that like, I have a culture here as a Black American in the US, but then there's always this kind of yearning to know where you originally came from. And just there's so many complex layers into navigating our history here. And so I began to, start to process that. And I was inspired by like the women of the Sunday Society in Sierra Leone. And they have these masks called the Sowe and the Gonde mask. And so the Sowe mask in their masquerade is kind of like the ideal woman. And so she's very demure and, small face. She represents modesty and, all of these ideas about what women should be. And then you have the Gonde mask, which is her sister, who's kind of like the antithesis of all that. She's been through a lot in life. She's not as beautiful. She's not as refined. But the thing that I love, I'm sorry, I have something in my eye. But the thing that I loved about both concepts is that they're both like respected as deities and higher beings. And so and that started to address the respectability that I had to unpack because I grew up in a middle class, like a working middle class family. And so, there's these ideas embedded in you that, you have to learn how to, like all my life, I was hearing like, well, you want to be careful. You don't want white people to think this of you. You don't want white people to think that of you. And you kind of start to be pitted against the same people like that you love. Like I have family who have grown up in a different environment. Like, luckily my parents were able to move us out of our small town when I was young, but my other family members are still in those towns. So when people tell me, well, you shouldn't act like them, it's kind of pitting me against who they are when I know they're good people. And so like I started to have to like come head to head with all that. So when I did the sculptures, I named them Debbie and Joy off of the two characters from the movie Friday. Debbie was like the neighborhood girl that everybody wanted, and she was pretty and smart and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then Joy was the ex-girlfriend who was loud and quote unquote ghetto and irrespectable. But to me, they're both strong women, and they both have their faults, and they both have their powerful traits that should be respected no matter their background. And so, that was kind of helping me unpack my ideas about that and really just give reference to all levels of being especially for Black women. So I'm sorry, I know that was a mouthful.
No, it's great. I think that it's fascinating to try and understand what it means to step outside of those culturally put on us ideas, size, proper behavior, those kinds of things, right? Like, and to step outside of those culturally imposed competitions, right? Yeah. And and I think that when we start to see those and break those down, it becomes something quite different. My background's obviously quite different. I grew up in a suburban town that was predominantly white. There was almost no people of color at all. And yet, for a variety of reasons, I never dug it and never fit in there. And so was always escaping to the city and other places and, trying to travel and see more of the world and more of what was outside of what was going on, And so it's amazing how people can start to change who they are and then how that impacts how you feel about yourself.
Yeah. No, I think like that environment and, especially the global world we're living in, is like, it's so much easier for people to create their bubbles, but then at the same time, there's so much more opportunity and more necessity, not just opportunity, but the necessity for understanding the different walks of life and the fact that people navigate into this world different. We can scream, we bleed red. We all do bleed red, but we all don't walk down the street and have the same experience, and that's important. And that's, social dynamics and systemic issues are very vital and important to our evolution culturally and as a society, and especially spiritually. When you speak of activism and those who are advocating for change, I think a lot of times the spiritual discourse is left out of it. And, globally, how are we transitioning spiritually to be more accommodating and understanding of the marginalized people in the world who are also like, going through these things? Because like in so many groups, you're told like, well, if you believe in all the goodness and the light and stuff, it shouldn't matter what your color or your religion or any of that your background is. But that's not true, because your existence alone is political. The body live through is political, and it comes with so much attached to it, and you cannot separate your artistic, your spiritual, your emotional, your professional, your relationship experience. Nothing is separated from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just choose to engage it or you don't, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Some of us have an easier time disconnecting, and we have a bigger more privilege to disconnect more than others. Some people, you can't get away from it,
For sure.
Yeah.
So how does this discourse come into your tarot deck then?
It's funny because when I first started this, like, I didn't think of it as like an activist deck per se, or think of it in terms of social justice and everything. I just knew at the time that I saw a lack of representation, not just in skin color in regards to people of color not being represented enough in tarot, but just being represented beyond cultural stereotypes. Like, when I can at least speak from the Black experience, that like every deck that I was encountering was based on history. It was based on a particular cultural tradition like Lukumi or Santeria, or a particular culture. But what if I don't resonate with any of those things because we are leaving out Black queer folks? What about the nerds? What about like trans folks and people who are living at so many other intersections? And so I just knew that I wanted a deck that everybody within the diaspora could feel included and feel like there was something in it for them. And so that's the point that I started with. And how does that look? That's a big, like, and ideologically, that's a big task to take on. But then looking back, it really wasn't too difficult in the sense where, like, when I started to like look at just spirituality in general, and the fact that, man, like, universal spirit always looks like whiteness, when it comes to African culture and magic and conjure and all of these things, those things are seen as dark. When you just on a basic idea of color, everything that's pure is white, is pastel, is soft, is angels with beautiful white wings and flowers everywhere, and everything that's evil is dark and red and, all of these other things. But when you look at the universe, the thing that encompasses us all is actually dark matter. And so it's like, that working through that separation. So, I chose the color Black to, one, not put actual skin tone into it, because as far as, Blackness in that color spectrum is such a wide range. And to also have the color Black represent something universal that isn't just tied to evilness and mystery, but that is something good, that is also powerful, that's also inviting and transformative, and have all these same adjectives that whiteness has been able to carry for so long. So
I like it. Yeah, it's very interesting to see how. Oh, there's so many things I want to say. Let me try and organize them a moment here. Number one, I think that it's fascinating how complicated and sensitive it requires us to deal with political issues, especially around representation. But how, at the same time, kind of really straightforward it can be if we really just sort of engage, right? Like I'm thinking about, what you just said about your process, and, it sounds like once you set your intention and you started to think about it, it became apparent which ways to go, and kinds of choices that you could make. And having just completed a deck myself that has a lot of people of color of it, and then, having sort of taken that and shown that to people of color to see how they felt about it, the simple answer that I took was, I'm going to depict people as like everybody's going to be like people that I've seen or people that I know, you know? And so, you know, where yours is the one color, mine was all of those spectrums and all of those shapes and sizes and so on, because I know those people, you know, and I know the way in which they look and are, and how that kind of, you know, can be art. So it's fascinating to me, because it seems like one of the complaints that people make about being considerate of these subjects is that it's too complicated or it's too difficult or so on. And yet that doesn't sound like that's what you're saying. And it's certainly not what I experienced when I was making my deck.
Yeah, honestly, the principles are like very basic. You just realize like, okay, I am born into this world with a certain perspective, and everybody's not going to have the same perspective. But as a responsible human being that desires to have positive progress in this world, that means I have to confront myself and be open to confronting other people on things that are keeping us from, you know, keeping people from being able to authentically live their lives. And I don't, you know, have this belief that the world is ever going to be this paradise of peace, because I even think that the tougher parts of our world is what makes it what it is. If everything negative ceased to exist, we would be nothing. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily about just making this world this utopian place, but it's just more so about giving people the space, especially now that we have the consciousness, to allow room for people to grow and develop in the way they want to, especially in Western society where everything's supposed to be about, oh, we're free, and oh, you know, we're supposed to have all of these, you know, privileges to be able to do things that quote unquote other quote unquote undeveloped places and indigenous places don't give you or whatever. Like, that's not true at all. There's just all of these expectations, and it's like you said, it's easy. Like, once you recognize what it is, it's just a matter of like just doing in your artwork and every interaction, confronting the ways in which you restrict yourself and in the ways in which you restrict others unjustly and unfairly. And like for me, myself, like I realized that I was fat phobic because that was internalized. I had moments where I realized like I was transphobic because I'm a cis woman living in this body from that perspective. And I wasn't transphobic in the sense that I didn't like or honor trans people. It was just my own ignorance. And once I was able to say, you know what, like, man, I'm a transphobic person, because that's been ingrained in me to see trans people as less than human. So my interaction, even when I'm giving a compliment and that compliment somehow dehumanizes them, how do I then recognize that and change it? But we're such in like fight mode that when people are confronted with the isms that they perpetuate, it's more easy for them to say, well, no, I'm not racist. No, I'm not transphobic or homophobic or anything. There's something wrong with your perception, when intent matters. Like, intent doesn't matter at all. I can place a bomb in your yard and be like, oh, I just wanted to blow up this tree. But if I blow up the whole freaking house and the property, that's what you're left with. You're left with the destruction of everything. And so when we start to approach our ideologies from impact rather than just intent and wanting to hold on to this idea that we're all just these great, perfect, good-hearted people, then that's when we can actually like start to make some progress. And to me, it just sounds like such a simple concept, but in theory it's so difficult because of all of the restrictions and the protective walls we put up in our mind to keep our worlds and our bubbles really safe and impenetrable.
Yeah, and it's so easy to, you know, put a really loaded compliment out there, you know, and, you know, I mean, one of the things I noticed with my kids, I have 2 girls, 8 and 10, you know, and people are always like, oh, they're so beautiful, oh, they're so whatever. I'm like, yeah, and fierce and strong and intelligent and creative and, you know, and those people don't mean negative things by that. And I think that it's fine in a certain way, but it is very obvious once you start to think about it, the ways in which people selectively enforce cultural values through the ways in which they provide praise and encouragement or, you know, silence or negative feedback or whatever. It's very easy to see how they sort of channel stuff in certain directions and, you know, without meaning it, you know, and I think that it as you say, it behooves us all to look inside some and be like, huh, why did I make that choice over another choice? Because because ultimately everything has meaning, and that meaning has many layers of context, and some of those contexts which feel like they are authentic are really maybe more just unconsidered things that emerge from us, right? And I think that there's a really challenging thing to consider: what does authentic really mean, and what do we actually want from being authentic or being free? What actually comes from that?
I think that if anything, I feel like we find the most authenticity in realizing that authenticity isn't a static concept. It's not about you being the same all day, every day. And I think sometimes that people feel like, well, you know what? I've been the same ever since I was 10 years old. But have you? Are you really the same?
Yeah.
What is the same? How you act is the same. But how you feel and understand the world, is it truly the same? Or are you keeping yourself from expressing that out of these preconceived notions and fears, Yeah. And like when you tell yourself, like I remember there was a couple of years ago where I was kind of like going through my transition in life and just kind of like going through my, identity changes and everything. And that's what I said to myself. I was like, you know what, like, it's not that I don't care about making money or anything. Yeah, I want some security. Like, I'm not going to lie about that part.
Sure.
But it's not about just being a millionaire or something like that. Like, I want to live my life as authentically as possible, where I can benefit and help the most people in this world, and leave something positive behind. And like you said, that authenticity means different things to different people. But if we allow authenticity to be a fluid concept, and that because I'm not the same now that I was 3 years ago, I'm no less authentic now than I was then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's really important to there's a method of control that I became aware of at a certain point, which was that, people would sort of pull out something from the past and be like, oh, well, you said blah, blah, blah at that point. So like, you're guilty like I am, or you've made these mistakes or whatever. Right. And I think that we really need to give each other space to change, right?
Yeah.
Space for that to allow to change. I grew up in a predominantly working class environment. There were lots of ideas that kind of found their way into my brain when I was younger that I had to kind of be like, huh, I don't think that that's true. That's not my experience. That's racist or whatever. And if we don't allow ourselves to sort of let go of that notion, we're never going to grow and evolve, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, one of the things that kind of what you just said reminded me of was about 2 years ago, I was sitting and journaling in relationship to some tarot cards, and I wrote down something that I'd written down a million times, probably, right? Like flipping back through journals, I remember seeing things like this over and over again, and I was like, I need to be free in order to whatever, right? Like different things. I was like, wait. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, how am I not free? Like, for whatever reason in that moment, it struck me differently. And I was like, how is it that I'm not actually free right now? And I realized that, I'm not a billionaire. There are limits, but there was this trap where I was living in relationship to these ideas that I was trying to move away from or transcend in one way or another. And so after that, I started thinking about how do I determine my course, not in real, like having done a bunch of work on my upbringing, having done a bunch of work on other things. How do I actually embody a freedom? How do I actually break that relational drive to that old stuff, because in trying to move away from it, still caught on that spectrum in a way that kind of had its own limiting function as well,
Yeah.
And so I've been sort of moving towards this, this idea, and I kind of keep circling back to it every so often to be like, all right, what am I living in relationship to? And do I want to be living in relationship to that? Or do I want to be doing something else?
Mm-hmm.
Given that I am, quote unquote free, or at least capable of making different choices here.
Yeah. And I think that's like a very powerful realization to come through, because like you said, it's so, we're so busy looking at the shackles that we don't realize that, they're open. You just see the chain, but you don't realize that the brace is unlocked there, and it's not what a double card is really all about, in the sense, like,
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, those, in a lot of ways we kind of we're more bound due to our own self-limitations. And it's not to say that the limitations in society aren't real, because people will definitely have more barriers than others and have to break past those barriers. But, on just a personal level and everything, there's still, some ways where we can really create our own system of freedom. And I also think, like, redefining what freedom looks like. Like, I have a neighbor, and he always laments about feeling like he wanted to be a millionaire by the time his parents died, but he continued to pretty much work in the same call center for 20 years. And it's like, like, he's a very sweet guy. Like, I love him, but it's like one of those things where when I pay attention to his speech patterns, it's always about everything that he's not capable of doing, when I very regularly remind him of all the ways in which he's free to actually do what he does want to do. Even if it might take some adjustment and change and some discomfort, he's not as bound as he has put himself in this box to believe. And I think that happens to a lot of us, where this sense of freedom we feel is unattainable. And I feel like it starts first at realizing who you are as a person, because everybody isn't coming into this life to be a millionaire. Yeah. Society makes us believe that we should all be trying to attain. Everybody should want to be a CEO. You don't want to be a worker. You don't want to be on the production line. Everybody should be striving to be an entrepreneur or the big dog, when no, find out what you want to bring into this life first. It could be your art and loving and healing people. It could be educating. Like, it could just be like, you want to make the world tiniest dog or something. It can be whatever you feel truly resonates with your soul. And when you start from that place, then you can start setting realistically attainable goals. And it might not look like you being a millionaire. I may never be a millionaire, but if I live the life that I wanted to live, doesn't really matter that I did it doing $1 million, or if I did it doing $500 in my bank account every month.
Yeah. And I think it's fascinating. There are readings that I've done for people where, they're like focused on how dissatisfied they are in this and that and something else. And, every so often in that conversation, something emerges and, like the reading says, well, that's cool. You're really successful at work and you've got this great relationship. And the cards say that until you have a child, you will never feel satisfied in life. Or until you leave North America and go traveling, or, it's been different things at different times, right? But there's this sort of, sometimes there's a thing that we pine for existentially or artistically or just in our nature. And until we can identify what that is, it's so easy for it to make us be dissatisfied with everything. Yeah. Even stuff that is good, but if we're expecting that sort of complete soul fulfillment in every arena of our life, we may or may not find that. We may not all be called to, as you say, be CEOs or, be the next insert famous artist here or, whatever, right? Like that's, the world requires many kinds of people doing many kinds of things. Yeah.
It takes all of us to make the world go round, and there's still been really notable people in this world who seemingly didn't do much or they didn't have a grand life during their time here, and they probably didn't even realize the impact that they left behind, but they still did, for better or worse, so that's why it's like I feel like I've told myself consistently to remember to be fluid. And I'm a Virgo, so you can imagine my it's just always coming up with ideas and analyzing and breaking things down.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can put more obstacles in my way. But if I at least remind myself to just like, you know, be like the water, I can move myself around them even when they come up and not really try and shackle myself into one way of being, and not one way of being happy, you know. And so I'm sorry, I just had like a brain fart. I hate when that happens. You gotta like a little of a thought. But yeah, like you said, it just takes you know, everybody just kind of looking at themselves, and it may not look the way you want to, because I promise you, not even 3 years ago, you wouldn't tell me that I'm doing what I'm doing now. Like when I look back now, I wanted to be respected in my field. I knew I wanted to be a creative, and I knew that I wanted to make positive impact in the world. And I remember when I was a child, I had gone through a lot of different things. You know, I've experienced molestation. I've experienced, you know, bullying and different things throughout my childhood. And I remember this time on the bus where like I had to be in like 4th or 5th grade, because I remember the bus used to go out to this certain area. So it had to be elementary school. But I clearly remember just sitting and looking out the window and telling myself, like, Courtney, you're going to help a lot of women, and not just young women your age, but you're going to help older women too. Like, that's going to be something you do. And like thinking back, that's kind of crazy that I was that young and having that thought. So it was probably just spirit speaking to me at that time. But like, I didn't know what that was going to look like. And as I grew up, I embraced that idea. I used to like idolize Oprah. Like I loved her. And, you know, she was the first example to me of, especially like a Black woman doing it on such a large scale and just healing and everything. You know, no matter what people think about her, there's still these very impactful things that she's accomplished in her life. And so I looked up to that. And so looking at it now, it's like, wow, like I'm actually at that place. I used to be, I was raised in a Christian household. Like I remember listening to John Hagee talk about doing exorcism on a tarot reader. That's like, I carried that thought and idea in my mind for a very long time. And look at me now, like creating a tarot deck and being in this whole, and this calling myself a magical person.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, so the life happens in these unexpected ways, but I'm just thankful to myself and to the spirits, you know, who've guided me to open up and allow life to unfold and to make this unexpected flower, you know, that it is now.
Yeah, well, and your deck is definitely a magical deck, you know. I mean, I'm kind of fussy about my tarot decks. Mostly I only read Tarot de Marseille decks these days, so like the older French styles, and so I'm like not really. I'm rarely inspired to look at new decks because I'm like, whatever. I've got a deck. It works great. It's 300 years old. It's like I don't need anything else, right? Yeah. And it's not entirely true, but it's much of my time is focused in that direction. And yet, when I saw your deck, I felt like I was seeing spirit come through, and I felt like I was seeing this sort of. I hope it doesn't sound cheesy, but like this, like a powerful awakening of people in the deck. You know, it was very interesting to me how alive it was, compared to, you know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with any decks anybody's doing, but you know, a lot of decks I look at, I'm like, whatever. I don't feel the energy from it, you know? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to that feeling, because that's how I was feeling about some of the other decks that actually did feature people of color. Even when I was looking, it wasn't that none existed. It was just that they were limited, and the ones that I did see, didn't, like you say, didn't have that. And there are some decks that you just connect with, and like you said, they feel alive. They feel like they have their own energy and their own personality. And I can definitely say this deck does. Like, it wasn't something that was like, you know, overly planned. Like, I looked at inspiration photos, I, you know, did research and all of that stuff, even for the guidebook. But every step of the way, the deck, the artwork, everything became what it wanted to be. Even when I tried to use certain people and drawings, like, they look nothing like the reference photos, you know, they just became their own thing. And I've had some experiences where people have channeled, my ancestors and guiding spirits. And there was one emotional moment for me where, a friend of mine channeled and she saw one of the beings, and I've seen them in my dreams. She described them to me as, because I would see them in my dreams as these very tall, dark silvery figures. And she was channeling and she described it, and it sounded like the ones in my dream. And I had never told her about these dreams. And so she was saying how they wanted me to know that this is healing them. And like, it was such an emotional moment because I never thought about that. We talk about ancestors and we talk about spirit guides and what they're doing for us, but we never think about what our work here does for them, and that their journey and that their desires and needs haven't ended on the other side. And so I truly believe that these cards are depicting and giving physical form to them. And maybe that's why it resonates so deeply, because there's something beyond me that is being put into it, but they have the desire to, connect other people to what they need ancestrally too. I mentioned in the introduction of the guidebook, I talk about Paula Noel, who's the author of a book, and I want to make sure I get the name right, but I believe it's called Reclaiming Our Ancestors and Uncovering the Indigenous Mind. And I found this book when I was in the rare book section at Powell's when I was in Portland. So I almost feel like this was kind of this little magical moment where I was led to this very obscure book. And it's like a grad student's thesis of all things in this rare book section. And she talks about her journey as a woman of Irish descent and the importance of understanding your own cosmology in regards to your spiritual journey, and how in Western culture, a lot of times we're taught that everything is a free for all because that's how our society is. And, we latch on to Eastern traditions or other indigenous traditions, and those things are beautiful and they are effective, but they're not always our own. And so, instead of trying to get away from those things that belong to us, we should start to explore, understand our history, understand where we come from, and start to look to those traditions, even if they don't immediately resonate, because at the end of the day, that's what we've inherited. And that's where we'll find our power. And that also addresses the issues of cultural appropriation and, the loss of so many cultures, because that's the drawback of this global society is the erasure that has happened to so many cultures when people have decided that they have the right to insert themselves into spaces. Like even myself as a, Black woman trying to understand different African traditions across the continent, I don't insert myself into cultures that I have not lived their experience. Like, yes, I'm a Black woman, but it doesn't mean that I have the same experience as a woman from Senegal. And so I can't go insert myself just because I resonate with their belief systems and their gods. I can just go and assert myself and use those things without thinking about how it is intrinsically tied into who they are. And I kind of liken it to inheriting your own kingdom. And I think I speak of it, it's like you inherit your own kingdom, but you want to play in somebody else's yard. You got some things right here, and you got some really powerful things, even if it doesn't seem as fun, right? Like everybody else's toy feels fun to play with, but if you just work with what you got right here, you may be able to draw something much more powerful and profound from that, rather than trying to work through everybody else's stuff to find yourself. You're going through everybody else's stuff to find you when you're right here.
For sure.
Like I thought that when I read her thesis, I thought that was really powerful, especially as a white woman, to write something like this and talk about her journey, because we don't get to see that process. And from the other side, because we don't talk a lot about how European indigenous traditions were also lost with the rise of Christianity and everything too. It wasn't just African traditions or Oriental traditions or Asian. So all of us are essentially suffering in a sense from this disconnect from our true identities. So
yeah, I think that wherever people are going to go, my experience is the ancestors are following you.
Yeah.
You know, so like wherever you are, you know, even, you know, as me, you know, I'm practicing Afro-Cuban Lukumi, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, my ancestors are there with me, and I got to deal with them and their stuff and their in and within their culture, and you know, all those pieces, right? Like we can't and we shouldn't try and escape those pieces by just sort of jumping somewhere else. We need to do something with them and those ancestors and their need for, you know, especially if they need elevation and
Mm-hmm.
healing and stuff like that on the other side. That's not going to get diminished by ignoring them or by, you know, just jumping traditions and trying to, like, you know, work other ways of working them, because, you know, often those spirits are going to want what they want, and our job is to be like, okay, well, we're going to have a negotiation here maybe, but we're going to work something out, you know, so that they can get what they need in the ways that works well for them, and so on, right? Because yeah, that ancestral piece to me is so often bypassed by a lot of people. You know, they really just want to, like, you know, they grew up, they had crappy parents, crappy grandparents, crappy whatever, and, you know, fair enough. Many of us have, right, in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all still there, which is the thing that I think is really a truth that people aren't comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you say, then they go to other traditions and go to other ways. When they go trying to avoid where they've been, it's really becomes problematic for sure.
Yeah, because you can't run from it. It's a part of you. Like, it's like trying to flick off a part of your DNA. Like, you can't really do that. It's
Yep.
going to be there. So you might as well face it. Like, for me, ancestral reverence has been such a powerful and, like, part of my spiritual growth, especially in this last year. It's something more recent in my life, having a Boveda and, you know, having an altar and, like, being very intentional and, like, you know, doing rituals that bring them healing, and rituals that, like, you know, from that time that I told you, like, my friend channeled and I was watching this anime, like, I'm total nerd. I love anime. And there was a particular one where in this one scene, the people cross over. And so it's not like they just go to heaven or hell. There's this, like, city that they go to, and they have to earn money to go across the lake to the other side. So they're pretty much, it's almost like a state of purgatory in a sense. And they have to essentially, you know, because of the way they lived their life, earn more money or earn more spiritual clout to elevate. But it's like that same idea. So, you know, I began burning money, and I began to just, like, literally, like you say, pray for their elevation. And, you know, we all have ancestors that were, you know, that didn't lead the best lives. You know,
Yeah.
I've heard some stories on my family side too.
We'll leave it at that. Yeah, everybody knows.
Yeah. So, you know, we kind of have to start, like, you know, taking responsibility into bringing healing and light to those areas, because that, I feel like that's why there are so many different strongholds. And, like, when you hear people's stories, amazing. Like, a person can be adopted, never grow up in the environment of their birth parents, but carry on the traits and the habits of those people. And, like, they explore that through science, right? Epigenetics and all of that, inherited trauma and all of those things. And they may not talk about it in a spiritual sense, but it's still very much connected to spirit. That, again, even being born and adopted by another family, you can't get away from the drug addiction. You know, you can't get away from, like, my mom always jokes with me because I was raised in a blended family. My biological father was killed when I was younger. So, you know, I was raised by my mom and my stepfather. And so, and I refer to him as my real dad. And so, you know, they both are very, very clean people, very, like, neat freaks. Like, we mop the floor twice a day. Like, and so my friends will always, like, joke about, like, Courtney, what are you going home to clean up? Because it was always super clean. But me, I could never, ever get it right. But my mom will always remind me, she's like, you just like your peoples, because your mom was like that. She was a hoarder. And, you know, she was clean, but she collected a lot of things. And so I'm just the same way, even though I wasn't raised in that environment, and everybody around me is, like, super, like, neat, free, clean. So, yeah, essentially, yeah, all that to say that acknowledging our ancestors and where we come from is just essential and vital to our spiritual health.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you got your deck done and you got your book done. When's it coming out? I saw some pictures of some press proofing going on the other day.
Yeah.
Where is it at?
So they have a I didn't realize until a little later that they actually have a holiday this month. So this week they're not printing. So right now they pretty much print the cards, the first layer, and so it's going to have spot gloss and foil. So there's pretty much 2 other layers of printings the cards have to go through, and then the packaging is the same thing, spot gloss, embossing and stuff. So, I really wanted to make the packaging and the presentation special, because for me, this is like an art project from start to finish, I wanted people to receive it and it looked like something you probably dug up yourself, like in the sense where not a lot of heavy branding and all of that stuff, but just like the package, the cards, So they still, have some work to do. I think that from what my manufacturer told me, they'll pretty much be done by the end of this month. It's mainly working out the shipping because shipping from overseas takes a while.
Yeah.
And so she was saying that it may be here by December instead of November. That I'm like, but man, shipping by air is like expensive.
Yes.
So,
AKA impossible. Right?
Yeah.
For certain things, it's just not possible. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know what? I know people are itching, but I'm like, y'all gonna have to wait unless somebody about to write me a check today to get here sooner. Everybody, I'm in the same boat. I'm waiting anxiously too, and not just thinking about the fact that when it gets here, I'm pretty much have 1,000 decks to sit out by myself in my little 1-bedroom apartment. So I try to stay as transparent about the process as possible so people understand the amount of work. And, just kind of remain patient because I know everyone's antsy and everything. I am too, but I also want to make sure that I do everything right. I don't want to rush and feel pressure to do anything that's going to cause more harm in the long run. So, I just try to stay transparent about that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
These things take what they take, in terms of time.
Yeah. And we're independent creators. We don't have we didn't start off with a ton of money and resources. We're doing this from our living rooms,
Exactly. Well, and even if you do, right? I submitted my completed deck and book, to Llewellyn at the beginning of September. Mm-hmm. And, that the planned release is fall of 2018, right? They're not turning that around in a couple weeks or a month, right? It all takes a lot of time. So
yeah.
So where should people come and hang out with you? Where should people come and follow up on this? Can they pre-order decks? Where do people need to be to get some of this majesty?
Right now I do have pre-orders open, and so once the first edition is sold out, I'm pretty much going to roll into the second edition. And I know there are some people interested in wholesale, so I do give some information about that. That part I'm still on the back end, working on and making sure I got everything, laid out properly. But people can go ahead and start submitting and letting me know, because that's going to help get that second print run. The way I've done it is the first edition, I really want it to be special. And the second edition is going to be special too, but I wanted there to be certain features and presentation wise things that really differentiated this first edition, because I have to give it up for the people who invested in me. I wasn't a person that no one really knew anything about. Yeah. I didn't have an established brand of trust or anything. I'm just an independent artist that people saw something in and decided to give their hard-earned money to see my dream come to life. And so I just definitely want to do something special. So now I want to work towards that second edition and get that set up. So, Dust to Onyx isn't a thing that just kind of comes and goes,
For sure.
Yeah. I want it to be a staple deck for people.
I love it. So what's your website?
Oh, sorry. Dust, the number 2, Onyx. So DUST, number 2, ONYX.com. And you can click on the shop link and it'll take you to where you can order the deck, and there's some other merchandise in the store as well.
Go check it out. It's really, really stunning. Okay. And if you know me, you know that I'm not like running around about everything. Like, yeah, this is definitely worth looking at. Thanks so much for making the time to talk to me today, Courtney. It has been every bit as enjoyable as I was expecting it to be.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation too, and hope your readers enjoy some of the things I have to say. So, yeah, this was
awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, as always, for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed it. A big thanks to the lovely human beings who have put some wonderful reviews on iTunes for the podcast. Please do consider supporting the Patreon. You know, I sound like a PBS ad, but seriously, even $1 helps. It all adds up towards being able to make all sorts of exciting things happen, both for yourself and for others. So head on over to patreon.com/thehermitslamp or use the link in the show notes. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.